Good morning, beautiful light beings. Shannon O'Flaherty here. Today, I'm going to answer part of Leslie's question about not being heard and conscious listening. It's not exactly the way you put the question, Leslie, but that's what I perceived from it is really what was going on. That the problem was that your daughter came to you and told you some stuff that years later she told you you hadn't heard. And so what's happening, a lot of people, this is a really, really common problem for a lot of people, not being heard. And it can result from a huge variety of things. So when we feel that we're not being heard, it's like we're not being acknowledged or understood or validated. And depending on the person, maybe they are being heard, but they identify their self-worth, their whole level of being with being heard. And so maybe that's a deeper issue than that even. But often not being heard sometimes is related to not being agreed with also, which it's not about that at all. Not being heard can happen when, for a child certainly, when the parents are either very dysfunctional or if they're having so many issues of their own, so they're wrapped up in their own drama, or maybe the parents aren't able to access that kind of level of intimacy for whatever their own wounding is. I mean, this is the tricky part about seeing our parents as young children also, because they're only ever doing the best they can with the knowledge and the experience that they had. So my dad, I mean, I just adored him, and I was definitely daddy's baby. But his method of dealing with my problems was complete distraction, and he would make me laugh. And so that was great. It lifted the energy, but it didn't really take care of my problem. And he was so larger than life, and I wanted so much to please him that that was more important to me than being heard. And so most of my life, I felt like I wasn't heard, certainly way into adulthood. And for me, that manifested as not being taken seriously. So these things can manifest in different ways. So, I mean, I've often joked with my ex-husband and other partners about men having selective hearing, that they only hear what they want to. But actually, it's not just men. That was just me being funny in relationship. It's everybody, because if something is triggering, if something is shocking to us that we're hearing, maybe we can't go there from whatever our own wounding is and hold that space for the child or the friend or the partner who's telling us whatever they need to be heard. So we negate it, or we distract it, or we don't take it seriously, or we just don't hear it. It just doesn't go in for whatever reason. So that's what can happen when we're not feeling heard. I've had many clients come to me. In fact, a lot of talk therapy is really about being heard. I don't know how many of you are in therapy, but a lot of therapy, you sit there and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and the therapist listens and says very little, because most people suffer from not being heard, and they need to voice all of this stuff because we need to communicate. We need to speak our truth. We need somebody to receive what we're saying. I've had clients come to me and I'm sitting with them and I get a hit about something pretty severe that happened in their early childhood. And I say it because if they're with me, it's the dance that happens. And they push away from me all shocked. How on earth do you know that? And I say, I don't know. I got a hit. I've been in therapy for 12 years and I've never told anybody that. And I thought, really? Well, what are you talking about in therapy if you aren't talking about the roots of your wounding? And then they pull back in and they deal with what needs to be healed, the roots of why you're not feeling heard, which can be a variety of things. And often it's because we don't know how to be heard. We don't know what it feels like to be heard. So how can you be received, even if somebody is actually hearing you? How can you be received if you don't know what that feels like? So that leads me into conscious listening, because on the other side of the spectrum is listening. So most of us don't know how to listen either. It's a learned skill. It's a learned skill. I can remember when Forrest was 6 or 7, and it was time for immunizations, injections, which I did back then. I didn't really know all of the things I know now. I might have chosen differently now. It's a big subject, but I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, I got my kids immunized, and I took him, and he didn't want an injection in his bum for whatever his reasons were at 7. And I said, well, that's just how it is anyway. The doctor wasn't having any of that, and so she just gave him this injection. And he wasn't a big crier ever. And he was so pissed off with me, not because of the injection, but he screamed down the health center, made me look really embarrassed as a mother, like I wounded my child in some horrible way. And I had, because what he said to me was, you didn't listen to me. You didn't listen. And I thought, whoa, that's true. I did listen to him, but I could only take the doctor's opinion. Now I would probably handle that differently. I would talk to the doctor and say, look, it's really important to my child. Could we please give this injection to him in his arm? And then if we couldn't, then I would talk to the kid and have a rational conversation and deal with it that way. But then I did what I could with the knowledge I had at the time. And he was really pissed off. And he told me, you didn't listen to me. And I felt really bad. I felt really bad because then it was done. And he used to say that a lot. I mean, I really learned how to be a parent with Forrest, because he'd be tantruming about something. And I'd say, look, I'm sorry. I don't have any experience of this. You're my first kid. I'm learning everything with you. And that was a really turning point for us, because he stopped and looked at me like, what? You're not always a mom, because kids only have their experience of you. I said, no, you need to help me. You need to tell me where I need to be better with this. So he's always helped me be a very good parent, because he's told me what he's needed to do. But we don't always have that relationship with our kids. It's not just with our kids too that we're not listening. It could be with our partners. And sometimes if you are in a dysfunctional relationship, or your partner is a narcissist, I'm going to have that Facebook Live at another time, or if they themselves had such wounding, hi Carmen, thank you. If they themselves had such wounding that they don't know how to be heard, or they don't know how to listen, or they have an idea in their mind of what that means, then that's going to be very hard to communicate and speak your truth. A lot of times people think that they're listening, but really they themselves are distracted. When people are on the phone, with you. They might be watching TV, or they might be typing an email, or they might be having another conversation at the same time, and energetically you can tell. And when people are with you, sitting right with you, oftentimes they're not actually listening to what you're saying. They're already thinking up their response, how they're going to respond to you, instead of really holding space and listening to what you're saying. So I've had clients come to me before, and they had some major issues with their parents and wanted to cut cords with their parents, which I'm really not going to do for anybody. And my question is always, has your parent abused you, used you in satanic worship, put cigarettes out on you, unless they were extremely abusive, I'm not going to cut cords, because most parental relationships can be healed. And this one client, the roots of her issues were that she hadn't ever been heard. And when this came out, she cried and cried and cried and cried a lot. And I said, what you need to do is you need to go and see your father and tell him that you love him. No, I could never do this. And I said, well, that's what you need to do. And without any expectation that anything will come back. And I said, he lived in a different country, so she had about a month to prepare for this. And she was intent on healing, so she was really willing to do what it took. And she went to see her father, and nervously she told him, I love you. And she called me so excited. And I said, well, what happened? She said, my dad said, oh, I love you too. And they had a hug. And it was the first time those words had ever been expressed, because her father didn't know how to express his love. And so she never felt loved. And so for her, it manifested as never having felt heard. Because oftentimes when people aren't heard, they feel like it's their whole sense of self is not being acknowledged or validated. And so particularly when your child comes to you, stop whatever you're doing. I was guilty of it too as a parent, and until I started on this path. Stop what you're doing and look at them and give them eye contact. Yes, how can I help you? Even just the other day, I was working, and my younger son, Rome, came and sat down next to me, and I was working. And then he said, when you have 5 minutes, Mom. And I realized he wanted to talk to me. So I said, okay, 1 second. I finished what I was doing, closed the laptop, and said, yes, how may I help you? And then we had a conversation so that I was completely present with him. And that's extremely important, not just with your kids, with your partner too. It doesn't mean that you're there to agree with whatever you say. It's that you're there to simply listen to what they have to say. And if you don't agree with them, and not to fix it either, by the way, if you don't agree with them, or you don't even know what to say, all you need to say is, I hear what you're saying. And maybe you want to reiterate to them that you hear what they're saying, so that they know they've been heard. And that in itself can be extremely, extremely healing for the person who is being heard. So what do you do with the fallout of something that's happened in the past? To get back to your question, Leslie, when it's already happened and you don't know if you really did hear it or if you hadn't heard it. According to your question, it seemed that you hadn't heard it for whatever point you were in that time. All you can do is forgive yourself, first of all. Forgive the person that you didn't hear at the time, because an apology is better late than never. It truly, truly is. whatever's been done cannot be undone, but the energy around it can definitely heal. And forgiveness can heal a lot of that by communicating your truth with someone, by being there to hear what somebody has to say. I mean, part of the 12-step program in AA and all of these other anonymous healing programs is that the person who has the issue, I went through this with my mother, the person who has the issue has to come to everybody that they've wounded and tell them, I'm sorry and I'm listening. And then they have to listen to receive all of the whatever their victim, in my case her child, needed to say. Now when my mom came to me to talk to me about this, because we were kind of on an okay footing, and this is the next talk about walking on eggshells around people, I said to my mother, well, yeah, no, Mom, really, let's not get into it. Things are cool. It's great. You're not drinking. Very good. And she said, Shannon, this is part of my process. I haven't heard you all of these years because I was in a functioning blackout, and I need to apologize. I'm deeply sorry for that, and I need you to tell me everything you need to say to me. And I was absolutely terrified to do this because I thought it was going to cause World War III again, and I wasn't accustomed to being heard. So I said, okay. And I calmly told my mother the worst things that I had really stuck with me, not every little thing, but the worst things. And immediately she started to get defensive, as was her way. And I was like, okay, forget it. And she said, no, I'm sorry. Because she was really wrapped in her habit of being defensive and not owning those things. And she didn't have any memory of these things, of course, because she had been in a working blackout at the time. So I was able to actually be heard from her. And then I got yet another apology, an even deeper apology, because she was feeling empathy and remorse and really healing from her stuff. So this is how, I mean, being heard and conscious listening is really the start of conscious, active communication and being safe to speak your truth. Because when we're not heard, we don't feel safe to be heard because we don't know how to be heard. And that spirals into not being safe to be able to speak our truth. So whatever has happened before, the past is the past. And the reason why we create all of this suffering and all of these problems in our life is to create contrast, so that we know what we don't want anymore, so that we can create desire, so that we can have something to expand from. I know that's a hard concept to get. Hey, Leslie, this one's for you. I know that's a hard concept to get, but really, if we didn't have contrast, and as we heal, the contrast is still there. I still have contrast, but it's not like heavy duty, oh my God, horrible drama contrast, okay? It's contrast relative to where I am. So your contrast gets less as your expansion gets more, because and also the way you deal with it. I mean, the stuff that used to cause major dramas for me now doesn't ruffle my feathers. And other stuff that used to make me feel nuts, if it's still coming up, the response won't be the same. It'll be like, oh, that old thing again. So the past is the past. Learn from it. Forgive yourself. Forgive the person that you felt that you didn't hear, and take this on board and start practicing being present and consciously listening to whoever needs to speak to you. And if you feel that you need to be heard and you know that you're going to talk to somebody who you feel doesn't hear you, you need to prepare them to hear you. It's really all about communication. I know it sounds crazy that you have to break everything down, but that's really how it works. So you say to the person, look, is this a good time to talk? Because I used to come home and Bobby Baby would be behind his computer and he'd be working, and I never would ask, is this a good time to talk? I would just barrel on in there and start unloading on him, and poor Bobby, he had his mind in another place. I didn't check first, is this a good time? So that's really important, especially if you call somebody, you might be interrupting them. They might have just picked up the call. That's why for those of you who are booking, who might want to work with me and are booking appointments, I say, let's book a call so that you're ready and have time and space to communicate and be heard, and so that I'm ready and have time and space to consciously listen and see what needs to be worked with. When it's just kind of a random time and that time hasn't been set aside, we're not going to have the most effective exchange. So, that being said, if you'd like to work with me, please do private message me and book a call, because these feelings of not being heard and not knowing how to be heard, or ever having experienced that, or knowing what it feels like, and same with conscious listening. If you've had to, maybe you come from a family of 12 kids and you have to jump in there all the time to be heard, or to maybe there was no listening in your family. It could be from a multitude of reasons. And it's about identifying what these root causes are. And that's the work that I do. It's a process of digging deep and finding the root causes of things so that we can clear them energetically. It's not an overnight fix. You have to commit to your part of the work. So how much do you want to heal? How clear do you want to be? Let me help you. I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. So much love to all of you, and I'll see you in the next video.